Today we're going to cover one of the most fundamental aspects of being a product manager. It's a term that you'll be very familiar with. I'll be very surprised if any of you have come across this channel and haven't heard about it. It's user stories. Now, what's the big deal with user stories? Why does everyone talk about these as the ideal way to structure your backlog? Well, today we're going to dive right into it.
A running ball.
Oh, terrific! The crowd love it!
Alright, let's start with some basics. Why are user stories so important? Why can't you just have a backlog of features that you want to go and build? Well, in theory you could. Some organisations do that, and historically a lot of organisations just listed out the features they're planning to build. The problem is, everyone wants a new feature. You'll have features being asked for from all parts of your organisation, as well as your users, as well as your own team. And it quickly becomes hard to remember, why is that feature so important? What is it that we're trying to achieve by delivering it? And this is where user stories become really valuable. They describe in a very simple way who it is that needs that feature, why they want it, and what that's going to unlock as an outcome for them. And that becomes really key when you're prioritising the work that you need to do, because actually everything you should be doing isn't about delivering outputs and new features. It's about delivering outcomes, actually helping your users with the problems or needs that they have.
Aha!
Okay, hopefully you're thinking, great, I'm on board. I love the idea. I want a backlog full of user stories. But how is a user story written? What's the structure? Well, fortunately, they all have a similar format. They're written really clearly. As this user, I want this thing so that I can get this outcome. For example, as a social media user, I want to be able to share posts with my friends so that I can stay connected with them. Simple, right? It gives you a really simple format for not knowing just what you want to build, but who it's for and why they want it. So how do you create your list of user stories? Well, to be honest, that's the tough bit. For any product, you really need to understand who it is that is going to be actually using or consuming the product that you're producing. And to do that likely means either spending time with your users, observing them, interviewing them, surveying them, doing wider market research. But one way or another, understand the different types of users that you might have, what might be talked about as target archetypes or personas. If you get to understand that, then you'll start to be able to break down what are their different needs and why do they need them. And quite simply, that's where your user stories come from. So at this point, you've got an idea of who your different target personas are and what each of them need and why they need it. So that gives you your baseline of your user stories that you can prioritize against. And you'd think that would be it, right? That's it, that's done. Well, not quite. In my experience, it's not enough just to have the title alone, because really different people understand the scope of that user story as being quite different. Let's take the example of the user story I introduced earlier. As a social media user, I want to be able to share posts with my friends so that I can stay connected with them. Well, does that mean that the outcome of that story is that they are able to create a post and share it? Or is it that they need to have already been able to create a post and they simply want to be able to share it? This is where it becomes really important to detail out the user story a little bit further and add what we like to call acceptance criteria. Now, again, there are many ways that you can write acceptance criteria. You could just write it as a list that describes some of the details of what would be in that user story. But there's one way that I like in particular, and it involves gherkins. Okay, maybe not actual gherkins. No, what I'm talking about is the Gherkin syntax, the format of how to write a story in a structure that follows given, when, and then. Essentially, what this does is it allows you to write an acceptance criteria in the form of a test that you can prove or disprove, which allows you to know whether or not you've completed the user story that you want to create. For instance, in the example that I just gave, we might have an acceptance criteria like this one. Given that a user has already created a post, when they click the share button, Then they are given the option to share by email. Acceptance criteria are really important when trying to give an idea of the scope of a user story. In this case, we're not actually saying that part of the user story is to create a post. We're instead saying that that's a given. That needs to be part of a user story that's already been produced before this one. Instead, given that situation, the customer, the user, needs to be able to press a share button. And that allows us to understand what they're trying to do and then what should happen next. They should be able to share it by email. And if you've got a few of these acceptance criteria, that will give you the understanding of what the scope is of a user story itself. Now, each user story will have a few different acceptance criteria, typically 3 to 5, but it could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less. And once you've got that, you'll understand what the different aspects of that user story are. And that allows you to estimate it and then prioritize it, understand which user story is a dependency for another one. In reality, there's lots of ways you could write acceptance criteria, but I find that one really useful because if you write them in the form of a test, you know whether you've done it or haven't, because it either passes that test or it doesn't. So that's my overview of how to write a user story. And I've tried to keep this simple, which is also true of how to write good user stories. The more simple you keep it, the easier it is for everyone in your team to understand what it is, why we need it, and what the scope is. And hey, if you create your user stories in a slightly different way, I'd love to hear about it. Please share some of your processes in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you like this video, make sure you like it and subscribe to the channel. I'm new on here, but I'm sharing lots of tips for product managers, whether you're new or you're quite experienced, on what I've found to work brilliantly in market. Right, that's that video done. I'm getting a bit hungry. What shall I eat? Maybe not a gherkin.